Good morning, church. Today is the third and last part of my devotional series on the work of the Holy Spirit in the book of Acts. In that first week, we saw that the Holy Spirit works in growing the church. We saw that in the book of Acts, and we also see it today. As the church grows, as people come to Christ, we must give credit to the Holy Spirit. In the second week, we saw that the Holy Spirit worked in the lives of individuals in the book of Acts, and the same is true today. The Holy Spirit works in the lives of individual Christians within the church. And today I want to talk about the work of the Holy Spirit in the local and universal church. I want to point out that he works in three ways. Well, there's more than three ways, but I'm only going to point out these three ways. The Holy Spirit works in setting the church apart. The Holy Spirit works in regard to the church's relationship to governing authorities, and the Holy Spirit works in regard to the church's impact on society. The Holy Spirit works in setting the church apart in a couple different ways, but a few different ways, but let me just list three of them. The first one is that the Holy Spirit sets us apart for fellowship. As soon as the church was first formed, we read in Acts chapter 2, verse 42, and then verses 43 through 47, that the church was set apart for fellowship. It says that they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes, and they ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. The Holy Spirit also works in setting apart the doctrine of the church. Christianity is doctrinally, or what we believe is different than every other religion. And we see this at play in the book of Acts when there was a disagreement over whether or not male Christian converts should be circumcised. In Acts chapter 15, the church gathers together, and through the guidance of the Holy Spirit, we see that the Christians come to the right conclusion, that circumcision is not a requirement for salvation. Next, we see that the Holy Spirit sets the church apart to behave and act differently. This passage doesn't come directly from the book of Acts, but I think that we see it played out in the behavior of the Christians in Acts. But rather, I'm going to read to you from 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 1, and then verses 9 through 11. So get rid of all evil behavior. Be done with all deceit, hypocrisy, jealousy, and all unkind speech. But you are not like that, for you are God's chosen people. You are a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's very own possession. As a result, you can show others the goodness of God, for he called you out of the darkness into his wonderful light. Once you had no identity as a people, now you are God's people. Once you received no mercy, now you have received God's mercy. Dear friends, I warn you, as temporary residents and foreigners, to keep away from worldly desires that wage war against your very souls. The same holds true for us today. We as the church, we are set apart for fellowship. We are set apart doctrinally, and we are set apart for good works. The Holy Spirit also works in the church in regard to the church's relationship to governing authorities. God, through God, the Holy Spirit, orchestrates favor and even disfavor with governing authorities so that God's will is done in the church and in the world. We have cases where the Holy Spirit brings favor upon the church. For example, we see in the book of Acts chapter 6 that there are religious leaders who are governing authorities in a sense, who become Christians. Most famously in Acts chapter 9, we see Paul, who is Saul at this point, a Pharisee, become a Christian as well, become a follower of Christ. So we see the Holy Spirit at work in the lives of certain governing authorities so that they become Christians. But we see another example of this when we see God at work in a plot in which the religious leaders are trying to kill Paul. We see this in Acts chapter 23. Paul's nephew gets wind of this plot. He goes to the Roman officer and then to the commander. And what ends up happening? The Roman soldiers are commanded to protect Paul. So here we see the governing authorities stepping in to protect Paul. Next, we see the Holy Spirit at work through disfavor upon the church. For example, in Acts chapter 8, the governing authorities are persecuting the church. This causes the believers to scatter. But what's the result of this? The gospel is brought outside of Jerusalem to Judea and to Samaria. Another example of this is found in Acts chapter 16, in which we see Paul and Silas jailed. This would be disfavor. But then we see that the jailer, who holds a government position, and his family become believers and are baptized. So in this disfavor, the gospel is brought to this jailer. Sometimes the Holy Spirit works through instances in which it seems to be favor and disfavor at the same time. For example, again in Acts chapter 16, we see Paul and Silas jailed. Again, disfavor. But then we see them released. Favor. And then they go on to preach in Thessalonica, Berea, Athens, Corinth, and Ephesus. For us today, I think that we have this same thing going on. We have to understand that God is sovereign. He is in control. He will bring favor and he will bring disfavor, and he does this for the good of the church and for his glory. Our responsibility is to respond in faith no matter what the Lord is doing in the world of politics. I think we still see favor. We live in a country where, for the most part, we enjoy religious freedom, and there's other countries in the world where they have this as well. We are able to send missionaries to other countries, and there are countries in which the gospel is outlawed, but God still, in some sense, allows favor so that these missionaries can function in these countries that do not like Christianity. Then we see disfavor as well. Worldwide, I think it's fair to say that religious restrictions are increasing. But what do we find in these restrictions? Oftentimes we find that in the face of restrictions and in the face of persecution, the light of Christ shines brightest and the church grows. Lastly, the Holy Spirit works in regard to the church's impact on society. The Holy Spirit works through the church to bring about societal and cultural change. I know we might be seeing the opposite of this, but I think when the church lives out faithfully the gospel of God, it impacts people, and there can be change in that culture. We saw it from the first century moving into what we would consider the Christian West, and even though we've retreated from that a bit, I still think that we see pockets where the church impacts society in a positive way. Within the first century, we see the church growing at a clip of nearly 40% increase in numbers per decade. As a result of this, we see that things begin to change. We see the poor being cared for. We see the widowed cared for, the orphans, the women, the slaves, and the sick. They are all being cared for by the church. I think that this continued throughout history. We see the church grow throughout history. 100 years ago, there were only 600 million Christians. Today, there are 2 billion, nearly quadrupling, and it has kept pace with the population growth over that period as far as the population of the world. The World Christian Encyclopedia says that there are 100 million converts yearly. And what's a result of this Christian growth? I think that we see this. Charitable giving. The American Bible Society says that 80% of the people who read their Bible regularly give to charity. The divorce rate, according to the National Marriage Project, found that people who were Bible-believing Christians are 35% less likely to divorce than people with no religious preference. The Barna Group says that practicing Christians are 5 times more likely to adopt than the general population. And when you think about the education system, not the bad part, but the fact that we want to educate our population, when you think about schools, when you think about universities, when you think about the rise of the scientific method, when you think of our hospital system, these have all been impacted by the church. That is, I don't know if we would have education for the masses. I don't know if we would have the scientific method. I don't know if we would even have a hospital system as we understand it without the impact of the church. The Holy Spirit sets us apart. He orchestrates even the governments so that the church can be the church, and the Holy Spirit works in the church so that we can be salt and light to impact our society and the world for Christ. Let me close with reading you 1 John 4:4. But you belong to God, my dear children. You have already won a victory over those people because the Spirit who lives in you is greater than the spirit who lives in the world. I'll be praying for you. Please pray for me, and Lord willing, I'll see you next week.